مساء الخير جميعا. Thank you so much for being here. We are truly flattered that you're actually staying to listen to us, trying to foster what?
Yes, more or less.
Investments through public diplomacy. Let me first introduce our two panelists. Mohammed Farid. Mohammed was for a long time the right-hand man of Minister Muhyiddin, and then he was also the vice chairman of the Egyptian Stock Exchange, and now he has started and heads economic and financial research and think tank. Sharif Khalil is the director and head of investor relations for the CIB. I will start by making a sort of a statement, and then we take it from there. Perception is the immediate truth. It is not the truth, because truth eventually comes out, but it is the immediate truth. And in many businesses, especially in the financial one, it's all about the perception. Are you perceived to be successful? Are you perceived to be risk taker, etc., etc.? So, from this context of perception versus investments, I would like to ask a few questions to our panelists, because over the last 3 years, we have been facing a very severe challenge in the perception of Egypt, the image of Egypt as seen through the eyes of the world. And after June 30th, that challenge has accelerated and escalated to such an extent that we were facing and still are a very fierce attack, trying to distort, mutate, and destroy the image of Egypt. And I also have to say that so far we have been losing this battle soundly. So we know what the facts are on the ground, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The eyes of the world, as it were, being largely influenced by what they see, is mostly seeing the negative side, or are generalizing the small pockets that are here and there and turning that into the status of Egypt. Now, we all know, as we heard earlier this morning, the world is flat. I say it differently. The world is one TV screen. The whole world is now reduced to one TV screen. And the power of what you see on your screen has reached the status of dogma. You see something, you don't think about it, you take it as fact. And if somebody says, well, where did you hear this? I saw it on the internet. It's like God sent message, indisputable, you cannot argue, you take it at face value. So I'm saying this because I think this leads us into the challenges and the difficulties we are having while engaging with foreign investors, even local investors, current, existing, or potential. So if I start with Mohammed, when we were together promoting Egypt in Hong Kong and in Singapore, if you remember, in 2010, I think. And if you will also remember that at that time, our pitch was, why Egypt? That was the headline of our mission there was Why Egypt? And the reason we did that at the time is because there was a very tangible gap in knowledge in the Far East about Egypt. So we started off by trying to explain why Egypt is a good place to invest in. Things have changed. Today, why is a given. I don't think anybody needs to explain what are the drivers that make Egypt an attractive destination. It's more a question of when. Which brings us to this question. Now, you were with the stock exchange after the revolution, and I think you were vice chairman of the stock exchange during probably one of the worst periods of the stock exchange, and you must have had to deal a lot with concerns from investors. Let's split this in two parts. Now, at that time, which is different from now, what were the main concerns that you were faced with? What were they worried about?
Well, thank you, Karim, for this introduction, and I would like to thank the audience as well for staying for the last session. It's always very tough to enthuse, I would say, the people, especially after a long day. The concerns during that period, I would say, were immense. Number one concern that we had to deal with and handle with foreign investors in various terms was that the stock market is not a place whereby people go and basically rip off the face of the I would say less or low income people, and it's not a place for total manipulation or only manipulation, and it's not the place whereby everyone who is dealing on the stock market is basically a thief and he needs to be prosecuted because of his risk-taking behavior and investing in the stock market. So the first risk that we had to deal with was the image of the entire equity investments that were present in the Egyptian market during that period, and how this will be dealt in the future towards the Egyptian stock market. The second concern that we had to face significantly during that period was making people understand that the stock market is not a luxury. At the end, you have investors and you have people who had put their money in this market, and ABC of any stock market would be the ease of exit and entry of this stock market. This had to be held or dealt with internally mainly, because these were some of the internal investors were requiring us to basically keep the stock market shut until we have some political stability, which basically would have ruined Egypt entirely from an investment perspective. The third concern was definitely that we, as people handling the stock market, didn't want to go to jail. So this was the third concern that we had to deal with on a daily basis, trying to figure out what are the right things to do, how can we deal from a legal perspective in different and various issues that on a daily basis used to come to the stock market. The first one, I would say, was one of the most daunting tasks that we had to deal with associated with foreign investors. Their lack of understanding what has been going through Egypt and what has been going through the stock market during the closure period. In addition to that, making them understand that the stock market, this is for international and domestic investors, stock market is not a place for people basically to do some illicit trading or fictitious trading and so on and so forth. This was dealt with different forms, I would say. The main form that we had to communicate on a regular basis, on an extensive basis with our stakeholders, mainly investors and the big fund managers and asset managers, and let them understand on a regular basis why the market has been closed, why we had to delay the opening of the market regularly during the first days of the revolution, explaining to them that initially it was an issue related to telecommunication. The stock market cannot operate without having proper internet connections and connections with the market. Then we had to deal with and explain to them that the banking sector is a crucial part for the settlement, so we cannot have any trades in the stock market unless the banking sector is operating 100%. We cannot accept 10% because at the end settlement occurs throughout the region of Egypt. Third problems, the curfew. You cannot operate while you're having a curfew at 2 p.m. whereby you need to be at home by 3 p.m. maximum, for example. So it's impossible for the banking sector and the stock market to operate. And last but not least, honestly speaking, is how to develop the processes to ensure that during that period, anyone who were allegedly, I would say, doing some or accused of doing some corruption here in the Egyptian market, to ensure that they will not be able to do any sort of trades in the market. This was of extreme importance because only one incident in this regard would have destroyed the entire reputation of the Egyptian stock market or the Egyptian capital markets in general, not only the stock market per se. So these were the fears and I would say difficulties that we had to face during the early stages of the January Revolution 2011.
Well, I think that period was exceptional, so you had to take exceptional measures, and in some ways it's probably easier to explain and defend than what we have today, I think. But going back to moving on to Sharif, now CIB is the proxy of the Egyptian economy, not only in terms of its size, being the largest publicly traded company in the market today, but also because it is a bank, and banks in general are exposed to all the cross sectors of the economy. Then, of course, you have the CIB being the success story that it is, having probably the highest free float, large portion of foreign investors, and so on. So I am sure that you get a lot of questions every day about what's going on. Again, I will ask you the same question from a slightly different perspective, because you are a company that I would dare say every single fund manager exposed to the MENA region will have a position in CIB. So when they have been speaking to you over the last 2-3 months, what is the most recurring theme that you hear? What is the main concern that you hear about CIB, hence about Egypt?
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, essentially, given what Karim was explaining earlier, CIB does tend to be the proxy stock in the equity markets for the region and more specifically for Egypt. Because we are a 91% free float, we have a very wide array of investor base, institutional investors as well as retail. And over the course of, since 25th of January, generally speaking, we do north of 300 meetings with investors each year. Now, having said that, the direction of the meetings have changed, if you will, from 2010, where everything was about the fundamentals of the market, about the bank, about the economic growth, and everything changed to almost only politics, where we spent the last 2 years essentially talking about nothing about CIB, very little perhaps about the economy. Mostly we were talking with investors about the political landscape and what's happening on the ground. That is a natural progression given the circumstances of where we were 2 years ago and where we are today. Now with June 30th revolution, things started to change a little bit. There's a little bit more clarity. Earlier in Karim's introduction, you were telling us how perception is key. Perception is definitely key, and how investors and the investment community perceive Egypt today is different than how they saw it a year ago, is different than how they saw it 5 years ago. Today, everything is about stability, everything is about where are we heading, and everything is about the damage that was done, how is it going to be rectified, and where are we moving forward. So again, the last 2-3 months, we've been mostly talking about the political landscape, what has been going on recently, and the changes that we're hoping that will happen after that. I can tell you with a fairly high degree of certainty, the sentiment in about Egypt has improved. It is more of a wait and see, but I am ready with my money. There are problems with investments and making investment decisions. As was just mentioned earlier, one of the main things an investor looks for when investing in a country is the ease of entry and exit. So we have put things in place. The government has done initiatives where we do have a mechanism now in place with the central bank to repatriate your dividends, to get your money out should you need to get out. However, this is a primary concern for investors because typically what happens, an investor will come, convert their dollars into Egyptian pounds, invest in the country. Whether they make a gain or a loss, when it's time to leave, they will sell that investment. They're going to take their money in Egyptian pound, they want to convert it to dollars, and they want to take it back home. This is the essential, the most basic cycle, if you will, of any investment. We did have problems over the last 2 years with investors getting their money out. There were restrictions, but it was more of a currency issue, the availability of the currency. Last week there was a conference that was done, and there was a conference call that was done with the central bank governor, where he assured the investment community that the government is aware of the situation. They are effectively taking steps that are going to alleviate the pressure on the availability of currency. And these are the main things that need to be immediately addressed today. There are problems with any market, and there will always be problems with every capital market in any country. One of our problems here in Egypt is the product. We don't have that many listed companies on the stock exchange, or at least a high float in the stock exchange. CIB is a proxy stock, but one of the reasons why we're a proxy stock is because there isn't much available. So this is one of the things that we need to consider. We need to see if there is new companies that are willing to IPO and get into the market. Again, sentiment is positive. People are more optimistic, whether it be the private sector or whether it be the international community. One of the things that the international investor needs to see is locals investing first. Earlier, my colleague here was explaining how things were difficult in the stock market because we didn't know when we can open. We didn't know if we're going to be witch hunted and be put in jail. These are the things, these are concerns that have been valid and have been happening over the course of the last 2 years, where the private sector was being viewed as perhaps abusive or opportunistic of circumstances, and there was what is known as a witch hunt. And this is a problem. Over the last 2 years, there was very, very little investment from the private sector in growing their businesses. That mainly because they are concerned. Why would I put more money in if I don't know if I'm going to be called into the General Prosecutor's office tomorrow? And this was the problem. Again, sentiment has improved since 30th of June, and we are starting to see locals starting to invest. The trickle effect of that is the international community, once they see locals investing, they will start putting money back in. And I think this is what we are hoping for. But mainly for the last 3 months, these are how our investor meetings are. These are the main concerns. It's getting in, getting out with ease, without complications. It's finding a good product to get into, and it's basically hoping for a better tomorrow, if you will.
Thank you, Chief. Let's move away from the micro stock market. Let's sort of go more sort of on the macro level. Now, we all agreed that perception is key. The other element, which is equally crucial, is credibility. I put it to you that Egypt's credibility as a host nation for investments has suffered very serious damage since January. I mean, really serious damage. And it's the sort of damage that you cannot rectify by words. You cannot fix it by saying, we shall look into it, or we are going into settlements and we have a committee, or we have this. It doesn't work. Now, the question to both of you is, to what extent do you think the very recent memory of what happened after January, all this witch hunt that you talked about, until today, in terms of reneging on agreements signed by previous governments, in good faith, you have to take it like that, in terms of revoking privatization contracts, for example, that are 10, 15 years old, in terms of deciding that whatever price was paid is actually not a fair price and needs to be modified. Now, how would you answer this? How would you try and defend such actions to mitigate its impact? How would you do that with a straight face?
I think the answer would be probably through public diplomacy. This is, I think, the core of this conference. At the end, in terms of economic figures, at least, the Egyptian economy is quite big, and it's quite attractive to foreign investors. Definitely, the political situation is not that easy. It's not helping much. However, when it comes to the opportunities of this market, having 90 million inhabitants living in this country, consuming or with a growth rate of consumption, despite the slow economic, I would say, economic growth that we have been witnessing during the last 2 or 3 years, consumption growth is around 4.5%. So in terms of attractiveness, it is still there. So at least you have something to base upon what you want to do in terms of rectifying I would say, the last 3 years' mistakes. I wouldn't have to say it's totally mistakes. It could be misjudgments that could have taken place during that period. Again, why public diplomacy? Because I've heard much, or during the day, that there has to be a vision, there has to be agenda, but no one mentioned, as far as I remember, who is to set the agenda and who is to set the vision. So here we're talking about the causality. I believe, before complaining about the government sector, honestly speaking, I think we need to face the fact that even the private sector, even the NGOs, probably wearing or possibly seeing the two sides of the story, even the private sector, even the NGOs operating in the Egyptian market, I would say are not eager enough, are not strong enough, are not acquainted enough with how to deal with such situations. It makes sense, but this kind of knowledge should have evolved through time, honestly speaking. Why public diplomacy? Because at the end, it is the private sector. Look at the contribution of the private sector to the Egyptian economy. It's around 75%. So basically, it is the private sector who should be, I would say, driving the economic agenda from the one hand, and driving the entire vision and mostly how the image of this country needs to be portrayed in international markets. So public diplomacy, not in terms of having missions basically going abroad. I tried to find, for the sake of this conference, is there any proper definition for public diplomacy, and I realized that you have something like 10 to 15 definition. So this is one of the main, I would say, difficulties, try to formulate something to be speaking about. But at the end, public diplomacy is about speaking to the public abroad. Speaking to the public does not mean that I have to have a mission, an official mission, and going to meet the Minister of Foreign Affairs of whatever country I'm going. It could go as simple as dealing with the poor people in different nations. Believe it or not, I know that this might be controversial, but public diplomacy could have been one of the main driving force during the Nasser era to have Egypt as one, at least in terms of, from a nationality perspective, that, okay, Egypt are helping African nations, Egypt are doing. This is controversial, of course, because this is not sustainable. I mean, you need to build the entire setup or the ecosystem to have this sustainable. But ultimately, without having the private sector organizing themselves first, this is a crucial point. You will find each single NGO or each single, I would say, association working on its own, trying to create its own, I would say, space to be able to communicate and deal with international investors and internationally, basically. So first of all, they need to organize themselves. Once they are organized and know what basically they want to do, they will be able to influence the government from the one hand, and they will be able to deal with the international community given their weight in Egypt and their weight in the Egyptian economy. So again, what I'm trying to say here is the causality. Rather than having the private sector NGOs being on the recipient side all the time, that, okay, we want the government to help us in doing this and that, but actually you should be going for it, asking the government to do it, to organize yourself, and without thinking about, I would say, personal goals or targets. Think about the picture from a macro perspective. I'm not a marketeer, but I think this is creating primary demand. You have in any product, you have a primary demand and secondary demand. Primary demand is basically what public diplomacy should be doing. I'm creating the demand for Egypt. I need to organize myself. I need to have powers with the government in terms of being organized. This is how I believe how things should be dealt with in the coming years.
Thank you, Mohammed. I think I'll just make one comment here. The public diplomacy, as we have been discussing it this morning, yes, it is a little bit of a fluid definition. It's a little bit like investment banking. What is investment banking? But I think it has, I believe, dual edge. On the one hand, you are trying to convey a message, should be unified, at least generally unified message to your counterparts, ordinary people across the borders. But I think it also has a very important role to play in becoming a sort of a pressure group internally, saying we have been to Saudi Arabia, to China, to whatever, and this is the feedback we're getting, which means that these are the things that need to be done on a government level to, for example, attract more investments. Because, I mean, there are difficult questions, and I will tell you one simple example which I personally witnessed. It was shortly after the January Revolution. It was a Saudi-Egyptian Business Council meeting in Jeddah, and the minister at that time, I can't remember his name, there were so many, but he was going about pitching Egypt in the old boring way, احنا حلوين واحنا اخوات والكلام ده. You must come, we love you, you love us, you know. And I remember very well, it was a very big Saudi delegation, about 80 investors, and one of them was quite candid and asked a very simple question. And he said, we are the largest foreign investors in Egypt. We will continue to invest in Egypt. But, Mr. Minister, can you guarantee me that my next investment in Egypt will not be revoked by the government that will come after you? And the response was silence, because there is no answer. And this is what I'm trying to get at. The other side of public diplomacy is that they should come back, not just only saying Egypt is wonderful and all that, but they should actually come back saying, this is how we are seen, this is how bad it is, and this is what should be done, and this is what people are asking for. And I think if we keep repeating that forcefully, things will change. Because these are difficult questions. I don't have an answer, and I don't think the minister had an answer, or any minister today will have an answer. Because, like I was saying earlier, Sharif, some questions you cannot answer simply by words. We have consumed our balance of words. They don't sell anymore. They need action. So what I would like to move on to is, when you are, the nature of your job has changed, for sure. I mean, I think all of us, and people like us, I call it investment ambassadors, because whenever we're talking to anybody about any deal, about anything, especially now, you're starting off by, so how are things in Egypt? And then you start explaining, or trying to explain what's happened, assuming you understand what's happening, of course. But I mean, after June, we were under massive assault internationally in the media. The images that you saw, the demonstrations, Rab'a, and it looked like a war zone. And I'm sure this was put to you many, many times. Now, the question is, do you think that Egypt as a country, officially, was able to respond timely and effectively to counter this negative image that we had over the last few months? Do you think that we did a good job trying to counter that terrible image that everybody was watching?
I think that there was a genuine attempt, but it was unfortunately handled by people with limited reach, if you will. Bear in mind, when I'm traveling to meet investors in conferences and what have you, when I'm away, I open the TV, I open CNN, and immediately I'm on the phone calling back home asking, are you guys okay? There's the image and the portrayal of the situation in Egypt was fairly different than what was actually happening on the ground. Agreed, yes, there were events where it was very, very aggressive. There were events, Rab'a was a serious situation, and definitely the image that we had and the response that we took from the international community was severe. Damage has been done and continues to happen due to simple, in my opinion, a lack of communication. I think over the course of the last maybe 6 or 7 months, it is seldom that we hear about any new major lawsuits happening to the private sector, with the private sector. For example, the land banks, which was an issue, and it was viewed, you bought the land way back when and you took it very, very cheap, and we're going to confiscate the land. Now, those are things that have happened. They've portrayed a very, very negative image about Egypt as an investment place, a place to invest, a place to put money. You're absolutely correct in the fact that there are no guarantees that the next government will not confiscate deals or reverse deals that happen over the course of the next time frame. But at the end of the day, I think it falls on, this responsibility would fall onto the cabinet, the existing cabinet, to provide guarantees for these investors that when they come in and bring in that the investment in, when they bring in that money, as well as guarantees of a smooth exit, should a smooth exit be what is wanted or what is demanded. It has been an uphill struggle to explain to people what is happening on the ground. We were fought in several different, there were too many moving parts over the course of the last 6 months. One, there was a travel ban, so investors were physically unable to come and view things on the ground. Two, the international media was portraying things perhaps accurate, perhaps with too much detail, or perhaps too graphic. It is not my area of expertise, so I can't make a call on it. But reaction did happen based on that, based on those facts. The fact you have money in a country and you have investments and you cannot see that investment or see the progression of that investment, and you're concerned that you're not able to get it out, is always going to be a very, very big concern. And moving forward, I think that concern has for the most part hardly moved. It continues to be a very, very, very high concern and high priority for international investments.
Well, I think talking about public diplomacy again, I really truly believe that each one of us, inadvertently perhaps, is actually taking part in this public diplomacy effort, each in his own field. Therefore, we go back to the original question that was raised with the first session of the morning. Do we have at least a unified general message that we are trying to put across? I mean, let me put it in another way. Mohammed, you are producing economic reports, industry reports, Outlook, and what have you. So obviously, over the last few months, you must have dedicated a good portion of your output to what's happening on the political arena, right? So how do you, in your own professional product, address these questions with your audience? What do you say? Because what you're doing is actually part of this public diplomacy we're talking about.
Well, first of all, I need to give them scenarios to be on the safe side. So basically, I give them several scenarios that could take place in Egypt in terms of the political developments. So the starting point would be having different political scenarios addressing this issue. But this is just a small portion, I would say, of our analysis. The bigger portion would be trying to figure out whatever disruptions that could happen on the political front, what would ultimately prevail, because this is a very important question to answer. We have plenty of, I would say, people discussing going to a nationalistic point of view and trying to nationalize, I would say, companies, lands, and so on and so forth. And you have some other, I would say, people more focused towards having a controlled market economy. So, and you have some different people that would want, I would say, an extreme in terms of market economy. But what would prevail at the end, in real terms, is what we try to account for in our analysis. It is very, I would say, intriguing mentally to be discussing, okay, the government will be responsible for everything from your education, food, health, and so on and so forth. But in reality, this is not going to happen, whether with this government, whether with a new government, whether with the old regime or a new regime. So ultimately, given that in reality, we know for a fact that the government will not be catering, sorry, for what is being requested by the nationalist people or the socialist people, I would say. So for a fact, we know that the private sector will still have a big portion in the direction of this economy. So despite that we might have political hurdles along the way, but we are quite certain that when it comes to economic needs and economic directions, you have some factors that you cannot, I would say, oversee easily. How can you compensate 75% of your GDP coming from the private sector? I don't know how, and I don't see it possible to happen. So from this perspective, we try to figure out as much as possible what is going to be sustainable, what's going to be on the ground, irrespective of what political regime is being empowered in general. Definitely, it's not an easy task, because you can see these things changing over time. But I would say that the current status of having damages associated with some court decisions with revoking privatization deals and so on, this is not a sustainable, I would say, position or a sustainable period to be repeated. So this is the ultimate point. You could be having some, I would say, mistakes, definitely conducted by everyone during the last period, the last 3 years, but what is most likely to be sustainable in the future, because this will prevail whether we want it or not.
Thank you. I think probably the first thing we should do, certainly in our field, when we talk to our counterparts, is instead of trying to justify or beautify past mistakes, is just simply admit them. Yes, we made a big mistake here, here, and here. We know it was a mistake. We know it cost us a lot. And simply because of that, as you said, we will make sure it doesn't happen again, because it will damage us more than anybody else. Now, so transparency, in other words, yes, admitting the mistake and acknowledging the cost to everybody is in a way some sort of assurance that it will not be at least easily repeated. Now, the second thing is there are too many moving parts, like you both said. Do you believe that any effort, public diplomacy or not, is going to yield any results in the absence of security and stability? Sharif?
Definitely not. Security is a very, very important key element. Again, because it's a ripple effect. An international investor no way would invest in a country where locals are not willing to put money in. And that would happen when security is back to its normal state. Now, I think it's going to be, again, an uphill task. But one of the things that's really important, and I try to, as much as possible, remind investors with, is we do have precedents. We do have a track record. Look beyond the last 3 years. Look prior to that. Throughout the global financial crisis, the economy was growing. GDP growth was growing. There was a lot of money being made in the country. I'm not judging old regimes, new regimes. All I'm saying is, at one point, things were economically in a very, very good state, starting 2004, 2005, all the way through to 2010. We've seen very high GDP growth. We've seen a lot of prosperity in the country. There might have been limited trickle-down effect to the man on the street, that is granted. But what I'm saying is there has been economic development, there has been economic growth, and a lot of money was made during that time, and security was very, very robust and very, very good throughout the same time frame. So I feel if we can go back to that stage where economically we are performing, once, of course, that first and foremost, security comes back. If we can go back to the state where we're growing at 4%, 5%, and 6% GDP growth every year, I think that the probability of making the mistakes of a backlash or going, the knee-jerk reaction of having to go after the investment community would essentially subside substantially.
Thank you. Mohammed?
I would say definitely security situation is very important to settle during the coming period if we want to talk serious about attracting investments. However, another factor that I would say public diplomacy and the government can be working on is the perception of the security. So we might be having some incidents here and there. However, it could be exaggerated, it could be exacerbated through the media. So this is another issue that needs to be handled, is how to trying to counter these exaggerations that could happen in international media towards the security situation. But again, without relative security, because in every country basically you will be seeing incidents here and there. Whether in the US, UK, in West world, Eastern world, so in all cases you will be seeing incidents. It is how you perceive these incidents. Are they just one incident happening here and there, or is it something systematic that you get to see on a daily basis? So, but again, definitely you need to find a long-term solution to this problem rather than a short-term one.
Thank you. Yes, of course. I mean, security is a key issue, and like you say, it's not only about feelings, about being safe. It's about feeling safe, which is something we're lacking for the first time in our lives, actually, not to feel safe. But I think overall, we seem to me to be moving slowly, perhaps, but certainly moving in the right direction. The one thing which I would like to add as public diplomats, if you will, one thing is certain, in my view. You talked about the impressive macro growth prior to the financial crisis, which was very impressive by all accounts, but it was on a macro level. It never really filtered down, and that was one of the main reasons we experienced what we did in January and again. What I'm saying is, I think it's clear, and it's important that we convey this message internally and externally, that any future economic growth cannot be sustained if the basic minimum demands of the simple citizen are not met. It will not happen again. I think that is the key message that we understand, and I think as public diplomats, like I said earlier, it's two-edged. We need to keep reinforcing this message internally. Spend what you like, but if the simple man does not feel the improvement in his pocket and quickly, we're going to have a serious problem. I think it's time for lunch. Ashraf just told me you have lunch boxes, I think, here, right? So thank you all very much. Sharif, thank you very much. Mohammed, Fareed, thank you very much. And thank you all for waiting. Thank you.